can't keep your maiden name because you're married. And you know, you go in there and they're telling you this is the law, you know it's not the law. But if you tell them the law allows me to be Kameri Mbote, you know they'll send you out through the door because they have the power to send you out. So what you say is, Mr. Kwinga, don't you have a daughter? If your daughter wants to keep your name, wouldn't you want? That is how you disarmed it. Then Professor Sihanya on the issue of identity. And it's important that you raise the issue of ethnicity, because one of the things that I've always asked myself is, does a woman have an ethnicity? What is my tribe? Is my tribe where I was born and raised, where I am married, or is it woman? Because you see, I have all these identities, but the identity that always comes up wherever I go and refuses to go is woman. And if you look at post-election violence, for instance, you had women who were now being told, you don't belong. So when we look at ethnicity and clan, because of the fixity to territory, they define who belongs, citizenship. And there are different citizenships. So there is national citizenship, Kenyan, and then there is the ethnic citizenship. And basically all those have people of different genders. We've just recently carried out a study on access to resources for women in hunter-gatherer communities in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And you could see when the communities like the Batwa or the Hadzabe or the Ogiek argue for recognition as communities, they come together as the body politic. But when they get recognition, then the question is, where are the women? And essentially that identity keeps coming up, but it's going to be like a layered onion, that you will have the next level, but gender still comes up. Then somebody asked about the relationship between customs, equality, and inequality. Of course, our constitution allows the application of Kashmir law, but it actually is very clear, and it says that they have to be compliant with the constitutional provisions on equality. So you can't actually say you are discriminating and you are within your rights because this is custom, because if it is against the constitution, for the longest time, customs were shielded from constitutional scrutiny, that you didn't go and check, is there inequality? But with the Constitution of Kenya 2010, they have actually been exposed to this scrutiny.
And then I'll come back. Wanjiku Kabira.
Thank you very much, for such a wonderful lecture. Maybe just two simple questions. One, it is the same one. It is the same, but in two parts. So ignorance is not defense. I wanted to hear something a little about that, where we are supposed to have access to this. If we like to have these resources, we have access to rights and so on, but we do not know. And then the law tells us it's not defense. What is the philosophy around this, and probably what's the view about this? Part two of the one question. I want to think about gatekeepers and the institutions and ask myself, what is their role in ensuring that those rights are accessed? Okay, I have the right to go and claim those rights, but what is the state's role? Because when we wrote the Constitution, we assumed that Parliament, that government, that judiciary is going to ensure that affirmative action, for instance, I'm giving an example, is put in place. We were assuming that the basic rights, Article 43 of the Constitution, the rights to water, everything and so on, is now going to be their responsibility to ensure that that happens. What is their role? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Rafael, a student staff for law school. My question is equality and equity. Equality is treating everyone the same way, and then equity is giving each one of them what is due to them. So please define my definitions and how do they have a bearing in your experience? Thank you.
In 2010, institutionalized discrimination.
Who are you, sir? Who are you?
My name is Andrew J. Franklin. The Constitution institutionalized discrimination and inequality in such areas as property, citizenship, participation in government structures, including the National Police Service and the police forces. Other than justices, all state officers must be citizens and not even dual citizens. The Constitution imposes accountability on all persons who live in this country without giving all individuals or persons authority to exercise accomplished responsibility. How does this square with your concepts of equality and justice? Thank you very much.
Okay, the guy you gave before and
I'm an advocate and have been and still am a student of Professor Kameri Bote. Congratulations. In your paper you say that normative equality is unlikely to yield equality of outcomes. And my question is, are we assuming that more and more equality is always a good thing? Is it, I'm just clarifying the question, I'm not asking a fresh question. Are we saying that ultimate absolute equality of outcomes, which is the destination that socialism or communism looks for, is the destination we are seeking? Or is there a point at which greater equality of outcomes becomes inimical to human rights and human dignity? And my thank you.
Professor Kabira, ignorance is no defense. I think that is a basic principle in law. But now when you look at the kind of constitution that we have, and when the Chief Justice tells us that it is Wanjiku, the judiciary is Wanjiku-centric, Wanjiku is likely she will know her right, but she will not be able to name it in the way that law requires it dressed and presented for vindication. And that, again, is a chiasmus. That you see you have a right, but between you and vindication of the right are things that you need to do. And once you don't do those, then even the right that you have is not going to be realized. So if you don't know you are right, then how are you going to claim that right? Of course, the state has a duty. When you have rights holders, you have duty bearers. And I think when we talked about the jural correlatives, we talked about right and duty. And so there is a duty, once you put in place a constitution, to get people to know what their rights are. And of course, the issue is, do we hold our state accountable? And I have begun to think that we are overwhelmed by the infractions of law that we don't know which one to follow, because there are so many of them that it's going to spread you thin just saying you haven't done this, that, and the other. And this requires regrouping probably before we have the next parliament to have a strategy on how to engage and challenge and disarm. Then the student who asks about equality and equity, again, equality, we said, is where you're talking about equal treatment. But equity actually allows for differential treatment. And I do hope that you've gotten the copy of the lecture, because I do explain in detail the difference between equality and equity. And because you know how to find me, I can explain that as well. Then the issue of the Constitution of Kenya institutionalizing chiasmus, institutionalizing discrimination. That was at the heart of what I was discussing. I didn't go into details about community rights. But you see what you're talking about, I believe you're talking about Article 65 of the Constitution, which is the one that denies non-citizens freehold rights to land and reduces their freehold rights to leasehold rights. But you see, that is the question is, what is the mischief that the law seeks to deal with? And how does that inequality play out? When I talked about community rights, I actually thought community rights are a lot more disadvantaged than even the leasehold rights of non-citizens, because right now they don't exist in law. So the thing is that you probably ought to join in the community movement for protection of rights, so that in the next round of constitution review, we don't reduce the tenure from 99 years to 25, which some countries have actually done. Professor Kanjama, you see, I think that you ought to be a professor because you have been your teacher for a long time, and now I really want you to graduate. And I like the question you asked me about more and more equality. You know, equality, having everybody being equal, I think I put that out very well. You don't have, even where we start, we are not at the same level. So equality isn't always going to be. So all the time, you're just trying to ensure that you don't submerge certain subjects of law just because they have no voice, and also because they are not able to bring out what concerns them. And if you lowest of the law, which again, if you're looking at building a state where there is stability and where people are pulling together, it is not good to have so much inequality, where people, for instance, keep talking about the 10 millionaires and how many million beggars. So basically, it's balance at all times. I don't think it is feasible to have equality of everybody. I mean, even having been taught dialectical materialism by Okech Owiti, I still, in '84, I still think that difference is going to be there. And basically what you're trying to do is to ensure that you don't so subjugate some actors that they really can't even enjoy the dignity and worth as humans.
By we, I mean African women. How do we come to terms with situations that sacrifice our rights for common good? For instance, in the home front, where, and you know very well that whoever you are with and you have produced these children with does not contribute anything. That actually he is the bigger breadwinner, or he is what he was. Or in the University of Nairobi, where your chair comes to you, tells you so and so, please do this. And you say, no, that's supposed to be done by so and so is a man. And then the chair tells you, you know, Professor, if we need this thing to go through Senate, we cannot rely on me. And you end up.
Introduce yourself again, Ms. Johnson.
Research has been well done. But at the end of the day, what is the significance? What is it that you hope that this work that you've done will accomplish practically? What difference will it make? Thank you.
Professor Kidi, was your hand up?
A very simple question. We often talk in Africa about human and people's rights. Is it paradoxical? One, two. Where do you find the interface between human and people's rights?
Professor Kitaka Wamberia, the last one, then I will now look for ladies and students to finalize.
To terms with the sacrifices that they make for the common good. And to me, that many women's battles for rights are going to be lost if they are not won in the private. They have not actually won the battle in the private, and this is why you will see around the country asking people about matrimonial property. It surprised me that there are very many women who talk about the property. We just need to know that it is an important contribution we play. You also know that in their autobiographies and told about the battles that they've had to fight to get where they are. They would actually be long battles. And essentially, that is just the way it is, to be included, not to be discriminated, and also to be equal. And then the question on you carry out, my greatest contribution is through teaching. Because essentially, when you have students, even if it is one, who gets interested, I can see very many in this room who can talk about gender much better than I can, because they attended one class on women in the legal process. And so basically it's also transgenerational transmission of information, and also getting more and more get lost because people lose interest in them. Then Professor Okidi talks about human and people's institution when we say the land belongs to the people. And then you're talking about human and peoples. And the question, then you know, it even becomes more complex because you have now a protocol to the human and people's rights on the rights of women. So we gain paradoxes because you see, when you begin to implement, at what point do you intervene? Then Professor Kithaka, on the issue of me to give this lecture in my mother tongue, I would struggle. I would actually manage to give it. I'm good at my mother tongue. But I express it in another language. And that then means that we are the poorer, because we keep becoming poorer and poorer in terms of the importance of local languages. I mean, like Swahili uses it in court. And basically, why don't we use it in court? Because probably the laws are not in Swahili. If you look at countries like Tanzania, or even look at a country like Rwanda, where they are moving from French and going to English, you'll see their laws. One part is in Kinyarwanda, there is a part in French and a part in English. And that keeps the language growing, which is something that we haven't done.
And I'm privileged to be taught by a professor. No, Professor, there is this case, it was decided recently, which the CIC had challenged the constitutionality of the Elections Act by purporting to allow presidential aspirant users to be included in the nomination list. And if I'm not wrong, it was a ruling by Justice Majanja, who interpreted the words special interests group to include such presidential aspirants who lost elections. And those 12 seats were left for special interest. And with my limited understanding of those two words, or that phrase, it includes persons from marginalized communities, persons with disabilities, women, and the youth. But for lack of a better word, I thought that was a funny interpretation, and I hope this does not expose me to content out of God gospel. So what's your take on
for this very enlightening lecture? I have a question. I would like you to share some light. My name is Professor Jane Mutiga from the Center for Translation and Interpretation. So my question is, Patricia, sometimes marginalized peoples or majorities, or minorities rather, get so accustomed to fighting for equality, and I think they get fixated at agitating. And sometimes space gets created for them, for them to move and change status.
But they continuously get fixated, and anytime you think about them, you see the issues they raise, they're caught up. I was waiting for you to say something about that, and I'd like you to please quickly say something about that.
Professor Nagin at the School of Law, University of Nairobi. And my question to Professor is this. I was taught by my good professor, Nation Kitungi, that when you are creating laws, there's a problem when you are writing laws, you create other avenues, so the laws expand and becomes more complex. So in your work, fallacies of equality and equality, is it going to bring control and offer solutions to some of these fallacies, or does it critique it and open us to a molecule whereby the molecule will erupt and more fallacies will come into force, and therefore we'll have a larger pool and a galaxy mainly to deal with when it comes to these fallacies and equality and equality. Thank you.
That we are increasingly told that women can do anything that men can do and enter any spaces that are traditionally reserved for men. But when the opposite happens, and when men try to enter spaces that are traditionally reserved for women, there's much pushback and it's not accepted at all. So the male definition of the masculine role is increasingly being eroded. And this puts pressure on men to define themselves. This is particularly true in America, and I think it's increasingly true here. Can we have equality without addressing the political role of men and without addressing the definition of masculinity as it is changing?
The lady here who was...
Collins Odote here, he's the expert on elections, and because I taught him, you will ask him about the elections intricacies. I will only deal with special interests. And I think this is the point I was making, that when we talk about special interests, we talk about marginalities, we talk about minorities, we need to unpack those. Because as long as there is no indices for what is marginal, what are special interests, then it is actually not good to nail down Majanja. He was also my student, so I'll defend him, because he talked about special interest. And essentially, we need to move beyond just thinking that special interest makes sense. I have this feeling that our Constitution is going to take a long, long time before we get definitions for some of these things. But this is not to make us lose hope. We need to begin to breathe life into these provisions by unpacking, ranking, intersecting interests. Then Professor Jane Mutiga, on the issue of minorities getting caught up. Again, remember I talked about differential treatment not lasting forever. And I think one of the failures of affirmative action for most groups is precisely because it becomes a permanent feature. And my thinking and others that I've read from is that we don't have benchmarks. So for instance, if we say affirmative action for women, what is it that we want to achieve? When will we know, how will we know we are achieving it? And do we monitor so that if the strategy isn't working, we discard it and look for another strategy? I think there is a laziness in terms of just following through to see, once you say, for instance, that certain people will be treated differentially, we don't follow up to see what are the measures doing. Are they making the situation better, or are they making the situation worse? And Tutu, you ask about way forward. I didn't just stop at critiquing. I am an eternal optimist. I never stop a story where there is doom and gloom. And I think I said that the nature of human rights helps us to actually begin to see ways of coming in, because they are not, they are malleable. They are not cast in stone. They are always new claimants. And if you look at the last part of my lecture, I actually give some ways in which we could counter the fallacies of equality. You're here because you will be the people, you and Katha. I can see you. you will be the people who take this to the next level. What are the strategies? I think I said that being combatant is not really the way to be. And I think one of the things that I have found that the women's movement needs to learn is negotiation and engagement. Because like when now that the issue is decided, I could talk about it without it being contempt. I thought that when the advisory opinion went to the Supreme Court, the women would actually go with a recommendation. What should we meet by 2013? So that by 2015, we are on the way to getting to the final in 2017. But basically, we have the same what Carol, I think it's Carol Smart, calls it the power of law. And I think we engage in law as women on male terms. You know, that negotiation, because we get into law with the power, but we never see the pathways that there would be for actually negotiating without having to really battle it out. It's not all for nothing. I mean, all or nothing. There is actually a place for meeting halfway. And I think that is what we'll have to do, because we got used, those of us that have been in the women's movement since the 90s, it was being combatant. It was the days when we were talking about the Constitution doesn't allow this, that, and the other. And now it does allow. So how do we access those rights that we've been given?